Well, hello, and welcome to the June podcast of Brainstorms, a podcast designed specifically for issues that affect our global war and terror veterans and their families. And this is the month of June, so we are celebrating both Flag Day, a patriotic holiday, and Father's Day. And both of these kind of tie into our next guest who we're so thrilled to have here in our beautiful Sycamore Studios in Plain City. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our great audience to Mr. Corey O'Brien. And Corey, welcome. So good to see you.
It's great to be here.
And I thought that rather than my giving an introduction, I know you're going to be, just a little bit on the humble side, but if you could just give us kind of your military service and we can kind of go from there so the audience knows what expert we're talking to today.
Sure. Well, adding on to your June, it was also my birthday a couple of days ago. So,
Happy birthday, Corey.
yeah,
Yay.
Celebrating 46 years on this planet. And part of my journey here on Earth, that includes my military time. So I was in the Ohio Army National Guard. I joined while I was in college at Ohio State. So I joined in 1998, and I was a combat engineer bridge crew member with the 1193rd. And then I also was switched to 216th HSC out of Hamilton County. And so 1998 to 2007, which also included a deployment to Kuwait in 2003. And then I volunteered for a deployment to Iraq in 2004 to 2005.
Wow, that's quite a bit of service. And I'm not sure what the Cincinnati, you gave a different little moniker for that HS3, whatever.
HSC, yeah,
Okay.
that's Headquarters Support Company.
Okay, gotcha.
It was
Thank you.
just one unit was, in actual Cincinnati, and the other one was, we referred to it as Hamilton County, but both basically in the Cincinnati area.
Okay, dokie. But you have a long family history that kind of ties into Father's Day and a trip you took this month of June. Now, how about if we talk a little bit about that, because you have a long family history. We've talked, Corey, on a couple of our previous podcasts about the military gene, about the fact that there is an actual gene that we have isolated that speaks to military service. Interestingly enough, it appears to be dying out in our nation, which is represented by the fact that less than 1% of our nation actually serves in the military, and we've got to talk about ways we're going to curb that at some point in time. But tell us a little bit about your family's legacy, because it's large.
Sure. Between me, my father, and my grandfather, so between the three of us O'Brien men, we have more than 56 years of military service covering 4 wars. And so for me, I was Army National Guard, and I was part of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. And then with my dad, Terry O'Brien, he was a Marine during Vietnam. And then after, he was infantry. And then after his time in service as a Marine, he switched to the Army Reserves, became airborne qualified, went through Sears School and became a Green Beret working with Special Forces. And then he finished out his career in the Ohio Army National Guard, which I thought was pretty cool. But then his dad, my grandfather, Charles Joseph O'Brien, he had just graduated from law school at Notre Dame, and he got drafted into the Army. And they put him as a medic at first, and then they found out that he had his law degree, and so he became a B-17 bomber pilot. And he was flying B-17s during World War II in Korea. And then with his law degree, he became a JAG officer and finished out his 36 years of service in the Pentagon.
That's amazing. I'm not sure how, being a lawyer, they make him a bomber pilot. That to me seemed a little bit, I can understand the JAG, which stands for Judicial Adjutant General or something like that. But putting him in the pilot seat seems a little extreme to do to any lawyer.
Right.
I mean, we've had a lot of lawyer jokes, but that is an amazing service.
That's just the three of us men.
Yeah.
Like I have a document. It's the mustering out paper from one of my relatives who served on the side of the North during the Civil War. And so just on the O'Brien side, a lot of military service. On my mom's side, her dad, my grandfather, he was deployed during World War II, 6 months after D-Day. But he was in England, he was in France, he was in Germany, he was part of Patton's army with Battle of the Bulge. It's just, when you look at our family history, between my mom's side, my dad's side, even stepmom and stepdad.
Yeah.
Even my wife's family military history is quite remarkable. Like her grandfather was one of 6 boys.
Oh, whoa, okay.
All 6 served.
Oh, wow.
And then like one of my distant cousins from my stepmom's side, he was in Iraq the same time I was. We also have one of my distant relatives was Greg Fronius. He was a Green Beret who unfortunately lost his life in El Salvador fighting communism. And after 9/11, we found out that he lost his life basically due to a double spy who leaked some information about the base. And so it's just something, again, I usually gloss over it and say, hey, military service runs in my family.
But it's beyond that.
It's
very in-depth for sure. And for some of the listening audience that may not know, because when I started with this, I wasn't aware even, of the different services of what they did, let alone the special forces. And when you talk special forces, you talk Green Beret, I say, you're talking the elite professional athlete in the world of those of us that just can barely kick a soccer ball or something. You know what I mean? It really is the truth. It takes so much training. And I'd like you to comment because I've met your family. I love your family. Your wife is one of the most incredibly giving and she has a certain discernment about what military service does and does not do, how it helps the family, how there may be little pieces of it, coming back into the family that don't quite belong there, in terms of, some apprehension and a few things like that. So I really admire her too. But this type of mega service is difficult on families. Do you not think,
I would agree 100%. When one person serves, the whole family serves.
Yeah.
And so whether it's in the National Guard capacity where a family member is gone for 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks over the summer, that still puts a lot of pressure on the parent who is behind in taking care of the family. They take on both roles. And for us, we have 5 kids. And so when you talked about my wife being incredible, that is an understatement. Like, she's phenomenal. She's incredibly patient. Not only because we have 5 kids, but because she's my wife and she's married to me. And with all the baggage from military service that I brought to the table, she has not only an extreme amount of patience, but endurance, I would also say, and just trying to juggle it all. So yes, you're 100% right. Between PTSD, TBI, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, depression. It's tough to have a large family or have a service member who is in and out of military service while they're fulfilling their obligation and their contract, and then also having your civilian life where you're managing kids and school activities and sports, and then you're also trying to manage, finances and transportation. So yeah, she's an incredible person.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I really hit the lottery with finding her.
Yeah, well, she had a pretty good one with finding you too. The other thing I say that, particularly when we're talking now the global war on terror with less than 1% of the population serving, it isn't like the communities actually know what's going on. It's not like they actually feel what's going on. And where they can be supportive somewhat, it's not like in our world wars where we serve, where the entire world seems to be at war and everybody was a little cognizant of what folks were going through. So that has to be difficult. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is to let the communities know that you're very lucky to have veterans and their families in your community. Do whatever you can to support them in terms of employment, in terms of education, in terms of when you were deployed, helping get 5 kids transported from one place to another, right? It's one of the things we're trying to do with Brainstorms is to get that message out there.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you look at a few things. Number one, when a lot of us were deployed, we felt like the rest of the world forgot about us.
Right.
And then when we came home, Ohio, and most people don't realize it, but Ohio has the 5th largest veteran population out of all the states.
It is amazing.
And so trying to reach out to those veterans and let them know, hey, resources are available and the community supports you, when oftentimes the community, like the bigger picture community, doesn't even realize how many people have served.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, kind of make everybody aware, bring communities together under the leaders, under our patriotic leaders who worked in our military, served in our military, and now are in our communities. So kind of tying together this mega legacy that you have, okay, and service and memorializing some people's services. I'd like you to give the audience a little idea of what you all did over Father's Day weekend.
Sure. So my dad passed away last year, and being a Vietnam veteran, there's an organization called the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. And what they do is over Father's Day weekend, they host a ceremony where veterans and their families can kind of converge in Washington, D.C., and family members read the name of their loved one. And it's part of what they call the in-memory service, where those family members are joining, or not the family members, but the veteran themselves is joining their honor roll. And so this past Father's Day, the VVMF, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, had more than 650 names read.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was great because there was more than 2,000 people in attendance for the ceremony. And the ceremony is typically held on a Saturday, and then on a Sunday, what the organization does is they sponsor roses. And there's 3 different color roses. Each color rose represents a different event. Like the red roses are for the veterans that were killed in action.
Okay.
The yellow ones were the ones that I want to say is POWMIA, and then white, and sometimes they put like red tips on the white, are those who came back but eventually passed away. Okay. And so there's a rose laying ceremony at the wall. Oh, I should have prefaced this that the whole ceremony is right there in front of the wall. And so it's the backdrop to the podium where you're reading these names. Which
is an amazing force of nature itself. I've heard so much healing that goes on there, so much, a lot of sorrow connected with that. Well, 66,000 some names of the people who were killed in action in Vietnam. It just goes on and on. So yeah, that is an amazing backdrop and an amazing way of saying to the civilians who've never really seen that or studied that, Look what just happened. I mean, this was not that long ago as you're reading the name of your father, and here you are, just turned 46, I mean, that wasn't that long ago.
That, and it's a great way for, spouses that are like grandparents to help pass that baton down of what their family member did in service many, many years before, grandkids were even around.
Right.
So we're trying to make sure that their legacy is remembered, and also making sure that history isn't forgotten. Mm-hmm. Like there was a lot of sacrifices that were made from earlier generations, and you can't ignore it.
Right, exactly.
And then something else, I'm just going to kind of piggyback on that, is there's something called Honor Flight Columbus.
Right.
And Honor Flight Columbus takes veterans to Washington, D.C., and they visit the different memorials. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is having high school students help take those veterans around to those monuments. And I had an opportunity to do it last spring here in March, and hearing the veterans share their stories, again, very cathartic, lots of healing, lots of emotions, the whole gambit of different feelings like, I was away from home. I came home and I wasn't welcomed. I didn't have a welcome home ceremony. And so Honor Flight Columbus is doing some incredible things with, again, making sure that those veterans and their stories and that healing process happens.
Right, exactly. And on previous, it was before our podcast, but we have it on our website. We have a U.S. Navy chief who's now retired who did a replica in San Diego of each of the different war memorials in Washington, D.C., because Honor Flight San Diego, where they have lots of people going back and forth, most of the people on the West Coast are not going to be going for school trips to Washington, D.C., like we can from here in Columbus, where it is so small. So it was his war memorials that are now in the command center of the Naval Training Center Foundation, the former Navy Training Center in San Diego. So again, I think that we're understanding that if we want to keep our nation together, if we want to continue with the patriotism, we must teach the history, because without the history, we need history, honor, and healing to get over previous conflicts and to unite us for future ones that may come. I've had numerous people come up to me and say, oh, Doc, I don't know really what you're doing with the veterans. We're not war anymore. I go, do you watch the evening news at all? Because there's hot spots everywhere, and everywhere in the world, we are the world's, peacekeepers. I mean, we truly do try to keep things to get aid into areas where there is, no aid whatsoever. So we really owe a lot to our U.S. military and to you and families like you, for sure. We met on a different patriotic holiday. We met on Memorial Day here at the Dublin Veterans Park on their service in 2017. And I thought maybe you'd like to tell the audience a little bit about our meeting.
Certainly. It was Memorial Day in 2017 here in Dublin, and my wife is originally from Dublin, and so her and her father traditionally go to the Dublin Memorial Day procession. It's not necessarily a parade, but to the wreath laying ceremony. They throw the wreaths over the bridge, and then they do the 21 gun salute, and then there's the processional where there's guest speakers at their Veterans Park. And at that park, you were one of the speakers. I was dealing with my PTSD. I was kind of closed off. Wasn't really showing much emotion towards anything. And when you gave your speech, which wasn't like "Go USA," Yahoo for school. It was more of we're failing our veterans. We're not doing enough for those that are coming home. We are not taking care of our warriors. We're not making sure that they have the resources that they need. We're just kind of sweeping them under the rug. And your message was so moving and powerful that it resonated with me. So my wife recognized that I was having some emotion, like I was liking something. And so when I told her I was going to thank you after the speech for your words, she just leapt at that opportunity and said, let's do this. Let's go up and let's talk to her. And so immediately there was a line forming to greet you and basically say, hey, wonderful job. And so I was kind of discouraged, and I was pushing for leaving. I didn't like crowds. I didn't like waiting in line. I had zero patience. And so she said, no, this means something to you. Make sure you share that with her. And so we did. We waited in line, and we started talking to you, and you recognized something in me where you could tell that I was a veteran, and I was kind of struggling. And I hate admitting that I was struggling. Usually when you talk about having issues, it's viewed as being a weakness. And with such a stigma around mental health, especially around veterans, we don't like to admit that we have problems. And so my wife made sure she was like, yes. Nope, we're not leaving. You're not dipping out on this one. And so you basically extended an opportunity where you said, hey, I see that you're going through something. I see it in your eyes. I see it in the way that you're acting. I have an opportunity that you might be interested in. And that's where you basically said, hey, there's a program called Transcendental Meditation, and I think you would be interested in trying it. And immediately I was kind of like, nope, no thanks, don't need it. But having conversations with my wife and saying desperate is not the right word, but hitting rock bottom and not knowing where to go. Right. But knowing that I didn't want to do medication because no one could tell me what long-term effects of that medication would be on my body and on my mind, and what happens to me if I don't take my medication or if I forget or if my prescription. There's just too much that was involved. And so you offered through the Resurrecting Lives Foundation a viable option that with Transcendental Meditation, 20 minutes of meditation 2 times a day. I can do it in the comfort of my home. I didn't have to go to the VA. It literally changed my life. And so anytime you need anything, I'm going to be a yes man because, again, I've seen so much impact, not only with my marriage, with my wife, with my relationship with my children, with, I don't know if I told you this, but I just finished my 18th year of teaching.
I didn't know it was 18. I know
18
you've
years.
received numerous awards, 2 of the last 5 to 6 years, yes?
I have, but 0 before meditation, and then 2 here in this short time since 2017. Yeah. So my colleagues, my coworkers, they definitely recognize the difference in me. And so that day, Memorial Day 2017, is a landmark date in my life. So I appreciate it. I thank you.
No, don't thank me. It was a landmark day for me as well. And when you say I recognize something in you, that comes, as most people know, I mean, brainstorms, we talk about it there, having had, my brain injury that was so stupid and so klutzy, literally hitting my head against a brick wall while putting up Christmas decorations, but led to, not being able to speak, not being able to see him. So when you said, I noticed something in your eyes, it's the face I saw staring back in the mirror for me for about 6 or 7 months. And I had not sustained that injury because I was defending our nation. Nobody had died around me. I had no threat to myself whatsoever when that happened. So that was kind of like what I recognized. And I can't even get the credit for the transcendental meditation because let me tell you, one of the veterans that I met at another program said, Doc, I'm going to transcendental meditation. I've heard about this meditation. Would you come with me? And I remember thinking, it was late at night. David Kidd, who taught you and taught me, was a Vietnam veteran, though, wonderful guy, comes all the way down from Northeast Ohio to teach this class in Columbus. And so I said, okay, well, I'll go with you. Well, as it turned out, that veteran left that night, and I stayed for the class. He came back. It was a large class at that time. And he had just got back from his second tour of duty. And having people behind him and around him who weren't veterans was a little bit threatening, and we did understand that. And of course, David worked all that out. But what I noticed is that it helped me so much. It helped me focus more. It helped me actually get that 20 minutes of relaxation before you get the day going. So you say, okay, I'm going to amass all of my power, all of my energy, and I'll get through this day. And it was really helpful. What you're not telling the audience is that you did not just take the transcendental meditation course, but that you dragged, 12, 13, 14 of your battle buddies with you so that there was a whole cohort of veterans who benefited from that. Was that not the case?
Yeah, you secured funding for us to put 20 veterans through the program, and it's a life changer. It's amazing.
And it is something that you can call upon, like you said, in your own home. Practice it. But if things get a little stressful at work, like when I was working in the hospital, I could just kind of draw on that for a few minutes or so and kind of get yourself back tuned. Definitely opens up that executive center. And we're very thankful for the David Lynch Foundation and for David Kidd for helping us with that. We still offer that as one of our major suicide prevention strategies because it really is. Since that time, you've kind of been dealing with, I never talk mental health, Corey. I always talk brain health.
Okay.
Because brain health, what is your behavior? Your behavior is a chemical going to a receptor, period. We in the medical profession are not smart enough to figure each chemical and each receptor, so we call it kind of the thing, mental health, but it is in the brain. And you and so many, about 750,000 to 880,000 now is the group for the global war and terror veterans who are struggling with traumatic brain injury because it isn't just a one-time injury. We realize now it's a chronic illness, a chronic change in your brain from now on. And I think you've had some experience with that.
And when you talk about transcendental meditation, it's one of those tools that helps me kind of deal with that PTSD. And PTSD doesn't go away, but there's days where before I had meditated, I couldn't think about the future. I couldn't think or see or plan or schedule. I was struggling just to make it through the moment.
Gotcha.
And then post-meditation, now that I've learned it, back in 2017, which I don't know if I shared this with you, but David Kidd and I are from the same hometown.
Oh, you did not?
very serendipitous that I ran into you. And then there's just so many coincidences.
Yeah.
Like he's from the North Canton, Maslin, Jackson Township area where I grew up.
I gotcha.
And so it was, again, all the reasons I was coming up with why I shouldn't. And then you said, hey, he's a Vietnam veteran, and this is where he's coming from to come down to Columbus. It was like, oh, so he and I have a lot more in common, even though we're separated by generations. But getting back to the point of after doing my meditation, I was able to start planning things. I was able to see the future. I was able to have better ideas. I was able to have good days. Mm-hmm. And it had been such a long time for me to have a good day, like a day where, and I think I've said this in some of the interviews, where I was actually humming. Yeah. And it's very rare for you to be angry and humming. Like humming is synonymous with joy. And so having joy brought back into my life is something that was just completely revitalizing.
And when you talk about PTSD, for some members that may be joining us for the first time, we're talking post-traumatic stress disorder. There are a couple schools of thought on that. I tend to be a student of the second school, which is relatively new, which states that in order for a person to experience post-traumatic stress disorder, that kind of overriding, overbearing feeling that kind of keeps being called back into your fight or flight mechanism from events, you actually have to have even a remote traumatic brain injury, that a brain has to be injured first in order to set up that reverberation pathway. And Jeffrey Bazarian is a person who has been studying all that. I seem to agree with him only because, again, I go back to putting up Christmas decorations, and I still will not go in a football stadium where football is it was my life before. It was my life of relaxation. I definitely had and still have evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder from an event that was literally a klutzy move. So I do believe that there is a component of that, which is why everyone who is being treated or has elements of post-traumatic stress disorder, you really need to get your brain studied too, because again, it's with a brain injury, you get a pathway or two that's either disconnected or doesn't reconnect in time, and that kind of sets up this reverberating pattern. The second thing I say to our veterans, because this happened to me, I said, you realize that what your brain is doing is reliving the very thing that in military saved your life and somebody else perished. So your brain's trying to protect you. It's a super survival mechanism that then gets in the way of actually getting back into the regular routine. But I find both of these to be very commonly seen together, for sure. Would you agree with that?
I would. And one of my biggest issues with the VA is I went to them seeking help. And the very first thing that they wanted to do is put me on medication.
Right.
And so I asked them, what is this medication going to do? And they said, basically, it's going to level you out, and you're not going to have the hyper alertness. You're not going to have, this anxiety. You're not going to have that thought process of identifying immediate dangers. And so my response to them was, well, that was what kept me alive. Mm-hmm. I don't want to lose those. I don't want to lose myself and become something else that doesn't feel and that doesn't have this awareness.
Right.
And so with the TM, I still have that hyper alertness, but it's something that I'm able to utilize to my advantage. Like I feel more connected.
Right.
Where I feel more in tune and aware of other people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And I'm also seeing and this is going to sound cheesy, but I see that my emotional IQ is increasing.
Yeah, no, that's not cheesy at all. And that's exactly what, the studies have proven that, as well. I think when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder, even in the civilian world, everything is take a pill. It's hard to work your way through things. One of the reasons I call this podcast Brainstorms is because I say, just like you, okay, you went through a storm. I consider our meeting in the eye of the hurricane. Okay, you'd already been through the first hurricane wall. All right. And you were just quiet there for a moment, listening to what I was saying, and that resonated with you. And you came. But then, as I said to you, I go, okay, we're now in the eye here, but we got to drag you through that other part of the eye wall in order to get out of the storm completely, which is why I think that the name is so appropriate. And we thank everybody who helped us come up with that name, and Tim Beckley, who went ahead and wrote the song for us and all of that. It really is a storm in the brain. It's something that you can't control. And transcendental meditation really helps you control that, as is mindfulness for some people, yoga for others. And one of the things we do at Resurrecting Lives Foundation is to try to get veterans into those particular programs to get them started, because so many times they're not employed, or if they are employed, they don't have that opportunity at work to do that. But the harder that you work at it, rather than taking the pills, the longer and better lasting I think I see are your benefits from doing that. Because again, you keep your brain going. That's for sure. When I first started this, so back in 2012 when we got our charter, every veteran that I had interviewed who had been to a Veterans Administration hospital, the least amount of pills they were taking a day were 19. And I'm sitting there thinking, you've got this 20-year-old, somewhere between 20 and 24-year-old, who's sitting in front of you, who never took a pill a day in their life, maybe vitamins when they were playing sports or whatever. And suddenly, they're on this with a brain that isn't quite completely formed yet, So you're putting a lot of medication in a brain that, under many circumstances, had the black box warning. Some of the psychotropic medications do not take these if you are 18 or younger. Because there is a chance of increased suicide ideation. But the difference between an 18-year-old brain and a 20 or 24, even 28-year-old veteran brain is not that much. They've since proven that being in the state of war, being in the military, being in that fight or flight actually keeps your brain in kind of an adolescent stance, which is ready to go at any moment, and it's hard to turn off because you've been doing it for so long. So I think that what you've told our audience is really very helpful, that it can be done, but it does take work, and you've got to be dedicated to that work. The other thing with the brain, as you know, you don't get better day after day after day. You don't get better for a while, and then suddenly you jump to a better level. But with traumatic brain injury, you can also jump back. Because as your brain ages, you're 46 now, your brain has aged decades since your actual injuries and war experience, and you have to keep at it and keep retraining, retesting, massaging the brain, so to speak. Don't you notice that?
I do. And I love the name Brainstorms, and just kind of looking at the image that you have here on the TV, it's kind of what I was touching on. If there's a storm, typically it's going to be pretty dark, and you're not going to be able to see very far. You're not going to be able to see far in the distance. Right. And that's that brain fog, that anger, that electricity like overload. And having the lack of vision, the lack of light, the lack of direction, the lack of knowing where you're at and where you're going is kind of where I was before meditation. Yeah. And then after meditation, you're not going to get rid of storms forever.
Correct.
But you're going to have, just like with the weather, you're going to have some good days. Yeah. And with those good days, man, that sun feels good. And it looks good, and you can clearly see your path. You're not going to trip. You're not going to stumble. And so that's again, one of the reasons why I'm extremely grateful for running into you during that Memorial Day back 2017. And so I've been able to, do a lot of positive things. And again, with that emotional IQ increasing and feeling more connected, I've been able to reach out and connect with other people. But back in the day when I was in that brainstorm, I couldn't get out of my own way. I wasn't connecting. I didn't want to connect. I was in survival mode.
Exactly.
And with all the medication that you had, basically touched on, one of my battle buddies, a good friend of mine, we were in the same unit together, went to the same basic training together. After his deployments, he was working for ODOT. His coworkers gave him the name Skittles.
Ooh.
And
that doesn't sound good.
And it wasn't because he liked Skittles. It was because he was taking handfuls of medication to try and function. Yeah. And so they're like, "Are you eating candy?" He's like, "No, I'm taking a huge amount of medication." And honest to goodness, there was a It was like a Tupperware box, like a crate of medication that he was going through each month.
Yeah, that's and so much of that has changed, and that's been helpful. It hasn't changed as rapidly as some of us wanted it to, but it is changing just a bit. And that is helpful and getting into the more holistic things. So I really appreciate your speaking about them. I always say that our meeting, all of those meetings are what I call divine chance. I don't believe in coincidences anymore after working with you all. It's all planned. The only thing is, am I smart enough to figure out what's going on at the time? That's
aware enough to see the connection. Yeah,
I know. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, I know that one of the ways that you have remained so grounded is because you're into so many different military, like kind of connecting the community and the military together. And I was wondering I know you've done some hard things. I know you've done just so much. What would you like to say you thought was one of the better connectors that you have with the community, and how you're educating the other 99% of what it's like to be in military service?
Well, again, right around that 2017 mark, that's when a gentleman by the name of Pete Lupiba was, he's a former Navy guy. He wanted to make sure that schools would be able to help those military-connected families find the resources that they needed. And so one of his ideas was something called the Purple Star Award. So again, it kicked off in 2017, and my high school was the first school in the state of Ohio to receive the Purple Star Award. And we've spread not only to currently more than 600 schools in the state of Ohio, but we're now in 46 states.
Which is amazing. I mean, that's a relatively short period of time. And what did you do? You were the driving force behind this, Corey. I know, again, you're very, humble and quiet about it. But what did it take to do that for an audience that maybe there's somebody out there listening say, I want this in my school or my school system?
We partnered with the Ohio Department of Education.
Okay.
And so I know many people, put my name to it. I was part of an excellent team. We call ourselves Team Ohio.
Okay.
And so with this team, we reached out and started talking to people. And when we're connecting with these different school administrators, different teachers, some of these teachers would have children that were veterans or had students who had served, or unfortunately, like with my school, we had 2 of our former students that were killed in action. Mm-hmm. And so there's always a connection to the military. And so starting these programs for the Purple Star Award is key. And so for us here in Ohio, we have on the Ohio Department of Education, there's like the requirements, the steps that you would need to take in order to do so. And you have to be a school that shows that you support your military-connected families. So identifying your military-connected families and then offering different resources. So you're seeing events like military appreciation nights, where we're bringing in VSOs or veteran service organizations that provide different resources and help to that family. We try and share different opportunities, not only as Purple Star schools. Like I'm the Purple Star liaison for my high school, but also for my district.
Okay.
We share things like the Ohio War Orphan and Severely Disabled Veterans Scholarship, which is a state scholarship. It's a state program. So not every state's going to have it. But right now, they're having their meeting, and by the end of July, we'll find out what percentage of tuition they'll pay for like state-funded schools. In many years, it's been as low as 86% of tuition. Oh, okay. And in some years, it's been as much as 100%. And so many veterans out there don't realize that if you have a service-connected disability rating of 60% or greater, then you qualify for it. And so the Ohio War Orphan and Severely Disabled Veterans Scholarship and things like DEA, the Dependents Education Assistance Program that the VA offers. So again, since I was able to have those good days and step out of those brainstorms and kind of see my way, I wanted to make sure that other veterans didn't have to struggle the way that I did until I could find help. And I wanted to be able to point them in the direction of resources that were available to them. So I was able to use that Purple Star Award platform to do that.
That's amazing.
I also started a Facebook page, and I know that sounds like I'm old because it's not Twitter, it's not TikTok, it's not whatever those other ones are. But I started a Facebook page back in 2017 or 2018 called Ohio Veteran Resources.
Oh, that's wonderful. So we could have the audience, can go ahead and tap you there at your actual URL is what?
It's a one-man show. It's just me.
Okay.
I'm the only person working there.
All right.
And so, again, I said I had 5 kids. They're all involved in sports and music. I'm also a teacher. I also coach my son's club soccer team.
Gotcha.
So I'm a busy guy, but I still try and find time to post those different opportunities. Like Adaptive Sports is having a big event here in July.
Right.
I posted about the DAV, the Disabled American Veterans. They held their conference here in Dublin, Ohio just this past weekend. And they were helping veterans navigate the claims process as well as what their benefits were. And so I want to make sure that people don't miss out because they're simply unaware.
And again, how do they reach you for that?
Oh, on Facebook. Again, if they type in Ohio Veteran Resources, that's me.
That's good. And says exactly what's going on. Perfect. Well, anything else you'd like to kind of wrap up with, Corey? Because you have a vast amount of experience. We all at our foundation, Resurrecting Life Foundation, and I know at the David Lynch Foundation as well, we're all just so amazed at everything that you do, and we all feel very lucky to have been part of your journey, and watch what you do with your fellow comrades and your battle buddies and that. So what would you like to say to our audience? Because you may be better winding this up than I am.
Well, you just gave me goosebumps.
Oh, it's so true, though. It's so true.
One of the things that, again, I've been having better ideas and better connections, and instead of feeling isolated and alone, it's great to be part of a community. And so trying to share those resources is one thing. But you noted, too, that in order to improve one's life, sometimes you have to go through things that you don't want to. And so just the other day I was thinking, man, you can't improve your health until you've started to heal. Like when you look at the word health,
right,
it has the word heal in it.
Right.
And it just blew my mind. Like I had never seen the word health that way before until you see heal. So until you acknowledge that there's a problem, and until you start to see that the life that you're living may not be the life that is cut out or meant for you, and that instead of just dealing with it, start healing with it. And so you start to see that life has so much more to offer than just trudging through it and surviving 1 second at a time, surviving 1 minute at a time, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week. There's a lot more life out there for you. And so I don't want veterans to feel alone. And when you have veterans that feel alone, again, when one person serves, the whole family serves.
Right.
So if you have a veteran or a service member who is not feeling connected, then the whole family is suffering, and they don't need to. Or I guess I should say there's opportunities for you to change that. And for me, TM was the avenue in which I was able to start that healing process and improve my health and improve my relationships and connectivity with not only the community, but also, with people.
Well, those are great words of wisdom, and I would thank everybody who has joined us here today to see the importance of, number one, finding that path toward healing yourself. The second thing is, though, the sense of community. We, in the civilian world, we are responsible. We are responsible for the fact that we now have 5 times more deaths by suicide than we do deaths in combat from our GWAT veterans, our veterans from the global war on terror. We have 1% of our country serving. We need to get behind them. We are the Resurrecting Lives Foundation, and we're not just about resurrecting lives. We're resurrecting the United States of America. And we thank all of you for joining us and helping us get through today's brainstorms.
If you are thinking about harming yourself or attempting suicide, tell someone who can help right away. Call 911 for emergency services. Go to the nearest hospital emergency room. Call or text 988 to connect with the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This podcast is made possible thanks to a grant from the Overwatch Alliance, and it's produced by the Resurrecting Lives Foundation at the Sycamore Studio. Music is written, performed, and graciously provided by Tim Beckley. Remember, when you work toward brain injury recovery, it is best to journey with a friend and keep your gait steady and your spirit strong. Finally, always seek shelter from your storms.
From Baghdad to Basra, the Boston, the Bakersfield, the hottest battle I ever fought is raging inside of me. My brain has been battered, scrambled and rattled, and no one knows what's going on with me.